Attempting to review Star Wars Episode 1 Racer with no biases is pretty much impossible for me. You see, the original N64 version of the game was quite literally the very first video game that I ever owned, or I should say that my parents bought me. While it was probably not N64 kid level of excitement, the nostalgia glasses are still very strong with this particular game. The main reason I wanted to look at Star Wars Racer now was because I just received the N64 style switch case for it from Limited Run Games, seen here compared to my original N64 version. I thought it would be a fun trip to take down memory lane and see what, if any, improvements were made to the original. Before we dive in too deep, remember that this release is almost a straight one-for-one port of the original. It's not a remaster at all, so keep that in mind somewhat as we go through this review. The original Star Wars Racer came out in 1999 for the N64, PC, and eventually the Dreamcast. A sequel to the game was released exclusively to the PS2 in 2002, titled Star Wars Racer Revenge, but I never personally played that. There was even an arcade version of the game as well. This past year, 2020, was when the port of Episode 1 Racer was released to the Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox. The publishing company Limited Run Games picked it up as well and released physical versions of the game a year later, which were simply too nostalgic for me to pass up. Upon starting the game, you will quickly enter the game's tournament mode, which is where you will be spending most of your time. Before beginning a race, there are a few things to take care of first. You select your driver and corresponding pod racer, all of which have different stats to take into consideration. You will also be buying new parts from Watto or finding deals in the junkyard, all to upgrade your own pod racer instead. You will definitely need to upgrade your racer some to get through some of the challenging courses towards the end of the game.
It's a new lap record!
After selecting your favorite pod racer, you can choose to enter one of the 4 Grand Prix, each of increasing difficulty. The first 2 tournaments scale on the easy side, and the latter 2 scale quite difficult, which is something I remember from the original game, and it remains unchanged here. You then also select the winning distribution prior to the race, with a riskier winner-takes-all model, or a more lenient payout to the top 4 finishers. This is mostly nothing new, but I was, however, immediately thrown for a loop as I had no memory of the game ever having intro cutscenes before races, and as it turns out, I was right. But after some quick research, I found out that the original PC version always had that, so it was simply a nice surprise for me to see that included here.
All-knowing master with a master key, Warden Fen Boda!
In general, the game controls pretty much exactly how the older ones did, which is mostly for the better. You blast off at insane speeds over some long, twisting courses, with the simple goal of finishing first. The only ability you have besides your pure racing and drifting skills are the 2 abilities to boost and roll your pod racer. Boost is handled differently in this game in the sense that it is unlimited with a couple caveats. 1, you can only boost when you are traveling at a high enough speed in a straight line, and 2, you can only boost long enough before your engine overheats. This dynamic of when and when not to boost is the main mechanism you'll need to master in order to win the last several races. If you do overheat or take other critical damage to your pod racer, you simply respawn after some lost time. Any minor damage can be repaired on the fly by your droids, at the expense of a major loss in speed. It's actually quite an intelligent way to handle damage, and the core racing still holds up incredibly well, even 22 years later. The game, however, does not hold up nearly as well visually, and that's putting it nicely. While the frame rate has been boosted to what has to be 60 FPS, which is awesome, with improved resolution, but in almost every other way, the game has not been touched. The textures are horrendous, the cutscenes are choppy, and almost everything is in dire need of a basic touch-up. Even the starting screen is the same low-resolution image from the original, making the port look sloppier than it actually is. It's probably not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, but at best, it's a huge missed opportunity to bring new fans in. Despite the dated look, the game still does an excellent job of transporting you back into the Star Wars universe. Everything from John Williams score blasting in the background of every race, the wonderful variety of planets that you travel to, and the lively voice acting of the pre-game announcers, Watto, and even Anakin all help to create an immersive and true Star Wars experience. In addition to the base tournament mode, there is also a 2-player split-screen mode, time trials, and free play. While these were always nice inclusions, you can't help but feel after 22 years that some additional options would have been nice. Like I mentioned at the start of the review, the game is not a remaster, and it is pretty bare bones of a port as you can expect, playing more like a polished emulation. There's nothing wrong with that, but I can't help but wonder how awesome a true, modern remaster of this game would be, especially if online play was included. It's too bad because the game is based on a 20-minute scene from a 20-year-old movie, so it will likely never happen, but this will be the pinnacle of pod racing experiences for better or for worse.
From all corners of the Outer Rim territories, I see the contestants are making their way out onto the starting grid.
There he is, the reigning champion of the Volta Classic and the crowd favorite, Suba.
One thing I wanted to single out was that in both the game's trailer and descriptions on the official website, seen here, the game promotes the inclusion of motion controls. You would think that they would encourage or at least promote this style of play, as it is one of the few additions to the original. Instead, motion controls are completely buried in the menu, not mentioned anywhere in the game's manual, and come with no virtual control guide either whatsoever. You are left on your own accord to figure out how they work, and after years of people homebrewing emulations of this game with Wiimotes and other accessories, you would think this would be highlighted, but it instead comes across as just another afterthought. To summarize, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is a somewhat uninspired port of the original, but does have several elements working in its favor, leading to a so-so score of 70. The core pod racing in the game still feels fresher than you might think, and the small inclusions that were added are a nice touch, even if you have to go looking for them. Honestly, the greatest thing that Star Wars Racer has going for it is the simple ability to enjoy the experience again without having to dust off your N64. The game absolutely has its moments, and always will, and to any of you who enjoyed the original like myself, it is worth a second trip to a galaxy not so far away.